Good afternoon, everybody. I am just going to wait a minute or two because I can see that we've got a number of people still to join. So we'll give it maybe a couple of minutes and then I'll get cracking. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on GDPR. Big topic over the last few weeks, certainly. Been pretty much everything that we've been talking about recently. Just to start off, this is the first time we've used this particular webinar software. I hope that everyone can hear and see me and see the screen okay. If you do have any questions during the webinar, there's a questions tab in the sidebar on the GoToWebinar sort of panel that should be on your screen. Please ask or type the questions in there. I've got a couple of my colleagues that will be answering questions out in the office, and then we'll combine them, look at the most popular questions towards the end, so that hopefully we answer everybody's questions. The first thing I would like to draw your attention to, if I can go here, is our help center. Many of you will have already seen the articles on the help center relating to GDPR and the subscription options, which we are going to be looking at today. If not, just go to help.supercontrol.co.uk and type in GDPR. There's a couple of articles there. We will be uploading a link to a recording of this webinar after I finish this afternoon, and we are constantly updating the information, especially in the main GDPR article. At the bottom of that, there's some questions and answers. So that isn't static content. You can revisit that, and we're trying to keep that up to date as we get more and more questions. Today we're going to cover off some of the changes that we've made in the last week relating to GDPR in SuperControl, which is to do with subscriptions and consents, but as well as covering some more general topics around that. You won't need to log into SuperControl for this, and as I've said, that there will be a recording of the webinar, so you can follow along afterwards in your leisure. It's not going to be a huge amount of demonstrations, not too complicated. So we've made some changes in SuperControl for GDPR, and there's more changes to come. I wanted to start off with what we're not going to cover today, and the kind of things that sometimes we're getting questions which, to be honest, it's really difficult for us to answer. Every business needs to be GDPR compliant. And just because you use SuperControl, that doesn't necessarily ensure your compliance. You're likely to have data stored in other places, from the filing cabinet to spreadsheets to other software that you use. And SuperControl is only a part of the mix of your GDPR compliance. So there are some things which we can absolutely help with, and we're going to go through that today, and you're more than welcome to communicate with the support team. But there are other things where really we are having to advise that you take advice from someone qualified to give that information. There are fairly significant penalties at stake here, which makes it difficult for us, and actually we've been advised not to advise on certain things. So we may not be able to answer all the questions relating to GDPR, but we certainly answer the things that relate to SuperControl. So within GDPR, there are two definitions of business: a data controller and data processor. With SuperControl, you are the data controller, you own the data, it's your data, you are responsible for it, and we are your data processor. We are something that facilitates the processing of that data, payments, bookings, and all the other things that SuperControl does. In fact, the essence hasn't changed at all with SuperControl. You've always been clearly identified in our contracts as the owner of the data, and therefore the wording hasn't been the same, but you've been the data controller, and we are the processor for you. So you're responsible for the data. We're responsible for quite a lot as a data processor, including keeping the data secure and making sure that everything is correctly handled. But it is your responsibility. Just by using SuperControl, it doesn't make you completely compliant with GDPR. The main change that we've made is to do with subscription options. This is what we're going to cover today: subscription options and how that works, our privacy policies. I'm also going to look at managing data in SuperControl, and also because a lot of our clients use MailChimp, specifically looking at how you would use MailChimp in order, SuperControl link with MailChimp, and how that works. So I'm going to jump into a browser here. Just bear with me while I move across here. Okay, so here is one of our demo SuperControl accounts, but it's exactly the same as any other SuperControl Plus account. We'll go under the admin menu to subscription options. And this is the new section. There are two parts of this. You've got subscription options and privacy policy. Under subscription options, by default, you will have a subscription option pre-added. Previously in SuperControl, we always had a tick box: please subscribe me to your newsletter. And we've sort of effectively transferred that into the new subscription options. The wording of that was fairly generic, and so we would advise you to either add additional consent options or modify it. It's quite important to important to have fairly specific wording around the things that people are subscribing into. So we'll look at how this works. You can either add a new subscription option, or you can edit one. Within here, you've got very simple, not very many fields. This top field simply relates, it's a name that you want to give this internally. So I've called it here email newsletter. The text is the piece that the guest will see when they are ticking a box. In addition, so that is what they're agreeing to. Try and make this clear, but enticing too. So here I've put, yes, please send me your email newsletter, but you could be a bit more imaginative than that. People are subscribing for something they want, they're going to want to receive it, so it's important that you try and make this as enticing as possible. Here we have different delivery options. One of the changes around GDPR is about you have to specify how you're going to communicate with someone, how you're going to market to somebody. And these are the various different options: SMS, phone, email, post. In this case, we're selecting email. This doesn't show on the customer-facing side, but we'll see where it shows in the back end of SuperControl later. But it is important in your text to mention how you are communicating to the person that they're opting in. Don't just send, please send me your newsletter or details of special offers or whatever. Make sure you're saying, please send me your email newsletter, or please send me your brochure by post, or whatever. You're supposed to be specific. Double opt-in. If you have an email subscription, when the guest clicks the box, we will then send them an email to confirm their subscription. That they then click on a link, a unique link in that email, and that double confirms, double opt-in that they want to subscribe to your email newsletter. It seems to be a little bit unclear about whether this is necessary or not, and certainly we know some clients have chosen specifically to use this double opt-in method because it really does guarantee that the person has chosen to receive your marketing messages. So it is there if you want to use it. Obviously, there's potential for a drop-off between someone checking to subscribe on a form on a website and then clicking the double opt-in email. If you want to make a change or create a new subscription option, and this is an important piece, so if I click save here, I get a big warning message. What this is telling me is that if I change my subscription option or the privacy notice, which we'll look at in a second, people who have subscribed to this previously may not still be subscribed to the new option. So I could, here I've said, please send me my email newsletter. I could change this to something completely different, and people who have subscribed to the previous version have now no longer subscribed, or they did not opt in to receive the newsletter by SMS. What we do is whenever you save this, we save a new version of the subscription option. So you will see in the filters in SuperControl who subscribed to which version, but we would urge you to not make too many changes to this because it might make life a bit more complicated for you if you end up with lots of different versions of your different subscription options. You can have multiples, and we certainly have seen clients that will have multiples. So if you've got different things that people may want to opt into, so You might have an email newsletter, you may have a postal brochure that you still send out, or you might have different types of email newsletter. There's no problem in having 2 or 3 or more subscription options. It's giving your guests choice what they want to receive or what they don't want to receive. So it's important to try and make use of that. The whole GDPR thing is still early days, so I wouldn't get carried away with it to start with, but as you start, people get used to seeing more consent options on forms, you may start to, there'll be best practice appearing there. The second part of this is the privacy policy. Now, every business should have a privacy policy and should have done for quite a long time. In the past, when you subscribe to SuperControl, we have added a fairly generic privacy policy to all accounts. That is still there, so if you look at this screen in your existing SuperControl account, you will see the privacy policy that we previously added. But with GDPR, it is the world has become a bit more complicated, and it's difficult to create a really generic privacy policy like that. So this is one of these cases where we do urge you to take advice. You should have your own privacy policies. On the screen here, we've got 3 simple things. We've got the privacy notice. A privacy notice, and we'll look at it in a second, appears above the subscription options, and it's really an opportunity for you to provide a little bit more of an incentive and information about the subscription options that you have. So telling them or reassuring them, giving them confidence that you are not going to pass data to third parties. This is in your privacy policy as well, but that's of course a detailed document. This is a very short notice. Specifically, if you do have relationships where you pass data on to third parties, and this is not third parties just for processing payments or whatever, this is where you are actually potentially passing data on to third parties who are then going to be communicating directly to the guest, then that's something that you should specifically mention in the privacy notice. For those of you who are Premier Cottages members, this section is pre-filled with a generic privacy notice created for you by Premier Cottages, which explains the transfer of data to Premier Cottages with a link to the Premier Cottages privacy policy. So Premier Cottages members, this section, this notice section is not editable. We then have 2 things below, notice link and policy. We really would urge you all to use this link option. So effectively, you're putting in a link to the privacy policy, which you should already have on your own website. It means that you're just maintaining that policy in one place, and you are. It means that it's straightforward for the guest. They are actually going to the source of truth, as it were. You can paste your privacy policy into here, and if you have an account up till now with SuperControl and you either were using our generic privacy policy or you had added one in a previous version, then you will see a privacy policy in here. If you use this link, then anything in this policy box below isn't effectively used. People will be directed to the link. So again, I would urge you to you link to the privacy policy on your own website and make sure that that policy is compliant while potentially getting advice on making sure that that is. There are online privacy policy generators, but I haven't yet been able to get advice on whether or not any of those are recommendable. So put your link to your privacy policy in here. You can enable and disable consent options. So potentially you might have seasonal things or things that you want to switch on and off. But effectively, you will now get these options on your forms in SuperControl. So now I'm going to look at the bottom of a booking form, which the consent options appear on all customer-facing forms, but this is the bottom of a booking form from this account that we've just been looking in, and showing you what has changed. So first of all, here we have, this hasn't changed, this was here before. I agree to your terms and conditions. A guest cannot submit a booking without clicking that they agree to your terms and conditions, privacy and cookie policy. Now, terms and conditions are the things that you enter. They also appear in this box up here. Privacy policy, this will, if you have added a link in that form that we were just looking at, this would redirect to the link to the privacy policy on your own website. If you've put the text into that form that we were just looking at, then it would show a window with that text in it. This cookie policy is a generic cookie policy which either we've added or you can add. Bear in mind that right now during the checkout process, this guest is on our server, and through the checkout of SuperControl, we do set a couple of cookies which necessitate the checkout, as well as Google Analytics tracking cookies. So this cookie policy really relates to the checkout process or the SuperControl process, not anything on your own website. So this is as it was before, with the exception that this privacy policy link will potentially now go to the one on your own website. Now here we've got our privacy notice, which we looked at on the previous screen. So here I've described what I'm going to send, and that I'm never going to pass on to third parties, and that they can unsubscribe at any time. Here again is a link to the privacy policy. It's the same as here. This also appears on inquiry forms with SuperControl forms and other places in SuperControl where we don't necessarily have this because it's not the booking process. So you've got your privacy notice, your privacy policy written here, and then you've got the consent options. And here we've just got the one that we added, or that I previously added, yes, send me your email newsletter. So this is, and if you had 4 consent or subscription options here, then they would appear in a list. So that's how it appears to your guest. If I now go back to SuperControl, we are going to look at some of the how we would find people who have subscribed and what we would do with them. So if someone has booked and subscribed, then they, in the various places you would see in SuperControl, you would see this. The yes, please send me your email newsletter would be ticked for them. Incidentally, if someone books over the phone and you're talking to them and you can tick these options on their behalf, there's an assumption that you will have got consent from the guest to do that. So you've asked them on the phone call. When someone subscribes, we log exactly who does it, what their IP address is, their browser, so we have got evidence of who has given consent, who has performed that tick. As we roll out future versions of this, you will start to have visibility of that as well. So we are really recording, giving you that audit trail which GDPR requires. So if someone asks, why am I receiving this email, then you'll be able to dig in and see exactly why. So here I've gone to database and then edit in order to see this generic form which lets you see your database, and I'm ticking people who have subscribed here, and I can now see that 2 people have subscribed to receive my email newsletter. You'll notice here that we've got a little version 1. It's difficult to see, but it says version 1 there, or ver1. So that is the version, the text. This is the specific text that these people have subscribed to receive. So I can look in here and I can see that these 2 people have subscribed to receive that, and then in here I can also see that that is ticked. If a guest specifically asks you to unsubscribe, or as we see later, they've unsubscribed from MailChimp, or you've sent a newsletter in another way and they've asked to unsubscribe, then you can go in here and untick that for them. Right now, we don't have a method for the guest to unsubscribe themselves because SuperControl doesn't send out marketing correspondence. So we're not the one generating the correspondence. That would typically be something like MailChimp. So it's difficult for us to have a unsubscribe option when we're not the one sending the email. But we will make this the facility for you to unsubscribe people much easier. This is unsubscribe rather than removing of data, which we'll talk about later. So here you'd unsubscribe them, save, and they would no longer be subscribed to that subscription option. So that's a way of seeing who's subscribed and what they subscribe to and manage those subscriptions. What I'm going to show you next is I have got, I've gone to database and then filter, and then I am going to, so apologies, yeah, so I'm going to database filter, and then I'm going to click my filter by subscribers. You'll see at the bottom here we've now got some stuff. Instantly, this subscription type, I can also filter by people that are subscribed to receive email or SMS, but really this is the key because you were mentioning the delivery method within this too. So I'm going to subscribe. As we saw earlier, I have 2 people who subscribe to receive this. So now I've got 2 records. Now we do have this link here to MailChimp for those of you who have set it up. You can set up a free MailChimp account or a very affordable MailChimp account and synchronize data to that. With a couple of records that would work fine. As soon as you start getting into hundreds, it actually, the way we're using an older MailChimp API here, and it sort of breaks as you put a large volume of data. That's fine because effectively the easiest way to do it is to just download it. This will generate a spreadsheet file. I can then go to MailChimp and very, very easily import that. So I'm going to do that now just to sort of illustrate that process. So it's created me a database file, a spreadsheet file which is locked by this password. If I put that password in and open it up, here we will see that we've got 2 people and they are here. So here's their email addresses. Obviously this is likely to be hundreds, so it's a pretty simplistic example. So I'm now going back to my browser, and I'm logged into MailChimp here. So what you do is, and I wanted to explain this process because it is questioned quite often, and it's slightly confusing. The best practice here is to have MailChimp lists that correspond with your SuperControl subscription options. At some point, and it is on the roadmap, there'll be a synchronization between those 2 things, but for now there's a manual process. So I would create a new list in MailChimp, which would be my email newsletter, and I would fill out this information to create a new list which corresponded exactly with the consent option. What we do sometimes see is people that create a new list in MailChimp for every campaign. That's not necessarily the best way to do that, because you then if you're doing that, you're not building up a history of the who's opening the email, who's clicking on links, and really importantly, who's unsubscribing from those links. So if I go into this list here, which is one we've created earlier, and I can add contacts, import them. So from a CSV, and in fact, actually, really simple way is just to copy and paste them, and then I can copy and paste. Sorry, I've put them back here. So if you can imagine, I have a whole column of people. You can copy and paste their names and other pieces of data about them, but in this case, I'm just going to put their email addresses in. So I'm going to import, and now it's telling these people are subscribed, and there you are. We've now imported our people. They were randomly generated emails, addresses, so it doesn't surprise me that it has failed. But that's as simple as it is. Now, if someone, so then I'd send a campaign from MailChimp. MailChimp is a fantastic tool, really, really easy to use. People may unsubscribe to that campaign. If they do, you can grab the people that unsubscribe in SuperControl at the moment manually, but you would look up those people either by their email address or their name in the database, edit screen, find their email address, and then you would be able to unsubscribe them from within here. The key thing is that even if you don't do that, and then next month or in 6 months' time, I do another filter to get the more subscribers from SuperControl, and I import them again to that same MailChimp list, then if the people are still marked as subscribed in SuperControl, they will not be resubscribed in MailChimp. So if you're adding to the same list, you're protected from resending to those people again. Plus, you're going to, as I said earlier, get the history of who's engaging with your emails. So if you're sending out each campaign, so make sure you've got a list in MailChimp that corresponds with your consent option, and therefore you're keeping things in sync. If you want to, you can manually unsubscribe people from SuperControl, but as long as you're only using MailChimp and that list for the marketing communications, you're not at a risk of resending unsubscribed stuff to them. There's a couple of questions here around this, which I'm going to maybe address now. So one of the questions, and there's been quite a lot of confusion around this generally with GDPR, is about the question here is on all of our previous bookings where guests have subscribed, then should we delist them and start again? As I mentioned briefly earlier, the subscribe option that was generically there in SuperControl and has been right from the start was quite generic. It said, please keep me updated with news and special offers or something along those lines. What it didn't do is specifically mention that that was going to be sent by email. That said, those people are bookers where they have booked holidays, where they're customers, and they have clicked a box to subscribe in some way. We've all seen and all had hundreds of emails that have been trying to encourage us to resubscribe to things. In many cases, those resubscribe emails were not really necessary. With GDPR, there is this concept of a soft opt-in, whereby if someone buys goods or services from a business, then you can communicate with them about to offer them similar goods and services without them necessarily having to specifically subscribe for that, as long as you give them the option to unsubscribe. So do you need to go back and resubscribe all of the people that actually physically ticked a box to subscribe to receive stuff in the past? Strictly speaking, because that tick box did not say we're going to send this information by email or by post or whatever, then you do, but you're also fairly safe by using that list, and that list will be imported. It is there now in your SuperControl accounts. So that all those resubscribe to our or subscribe to don't miss out kind of emails that you've been getting, some of those weren't actually necessary. There's a question here about the Premier Cottages. Yes, there will be a link to the latest Premier Cottages privacy policy that will be contained in the privacy notice section of this piece here. So this has got specific wording about Premier Cottages and the data transfer options there, and you won't be able to edit that if you're a Premier Cottages member. There's a question here, does SuperControl have a privacy policy itself? There are two sides of that question. Do we have a privacy policy generally as a company? Yes, we do, and that the amended policy is going to come back from our lawyers very shortly. It's taken forever. As you can imagine, all the lawyers have been absolutely crazy busy with this stuff. So that will be going live on our website soon. Do we have a generic privacy policy that we can generate for clients? The advice that we've had has been quite specific on that, and the answer is no. It is something that you should be getting done for your own businesses. Every business is different, and specifically there's quite significant penalties for GDPR, and our advice has been not to get involved in that. It may seem like a bit of a cop-out, but it really is difficult for us to provide that a generic piece of information, because we don't know all the specific connections that relate to each of your businesses. There's a question here about when guests book over the telephone, how can they take the terms and conditions and or privacy policy and subscribe to your options. That is something which was part of the development project, has been done, but hasn't gone live yet. So in the same way that you can send a link to your guests to make a payment after the booking process, you will also be able to send a link for telephone bookers or potentially bookers from other channels, although there's complications about terms and conditions sometimes there. But certainly for telephone bookers, you'll be able to send them a link. On that link, it'll say, I agree to your terms and conditions, and it will give them options to subscribe to your different newsletters and, or subscription options. We will log that as being recorded against the booking. It's been the case of, obviously, with online booking since the start, and for quite some time, if a guest makes a payment through our payment form, so for telephone booking, they've had to click the box that says, I agree with the terms and conditions, but you'll now have a specific link that you can put into your auto correspondence, or it'll be in our generic correspondence for them to tick and to agree to your privacy policy and terms and conditions. There's another question here. It says, if we don't offer any subscription options, all you'll need is a privacy notice on your website. Absolutely. There's no, if you're never going to send anyone an email newsletter or a brochure or whatever, then just disable all of the subscription options. You will have a generic one there in your account. So go to admin, subscription options, and then just disable the email newsletter. Everything will be, it just disappears from your booking form. You should still have a privacy notice on your, or privacy policy on your website, which tells people what you're going to do with their data. But if you're not going to send them anything, then don't confuse life if you are going to give them options which no one's ever going to tick, or you're not going to do anything with. Just reading some of these questions here. There's a question about the database filter section. So this database filter section may differ depending on the type of account you have. You'll see this account is one of our demo accounts, so it has a lot of options and extras and things, and I think one of the attendees sort of saw a lot of stuff that they didn't have in their account. Similarly, we have a lot of custom questions in this demo account, so you may not have all these options in here, but this is the new piece, is at the bottom, relating to subscription options. Just reading another question here. We do not use MailChimp, therefore my question, once the guest has worked with the tick, it's not been ticked, how do you separate them from the standard database in SuperControl? I'm not quite clear. I get the sense that I think we'll come back to that question there. If I can't answer all the questions all the time, then we'll come back to you with them. Okay, so now we've got a couple of questions about deletion of data, which is one piece that I was going to cover off. So GDPR lets each business determine their own data retention policy, and GDPR doesn't override other rules. So if you need to keep your data for a certain period for the tax man or for other purposes in any business, then that becomes you're allowed to keep the data for that length of time. But data which is old, out of date, no longer used, and that is not necessary anymore should really be purged. But it's up to you, unhelpfully, to decide how long that's going to be. Now we've got some clients who are coming to us asking to delete data that is, everything's more than 7 years old, or some clients that are coming to us to remove data more recent than that, or more specific. Right now we are still writing the functions to remove data. If you want data removed that is older than a certain date, then eventually there will be a function in your SuperControl account to do this, but it's quite an involved thing because data is everywhere, from log files and correspondence history to and in lots of different places in the database. So what we're doing is writing a single data sort of purging function which will do this. It's still probably got a few weeks of work on that yet. It's a massive task. So if you want a bulk removal of data, right now you should email our support team, support@supercontrol.co.uk, or submit a ticket through your account, and that will and we'll queue that up. As soon as we have the function ready and it's fully tested, then we'll get back in touch with you with a document which details exactly what data you want us to remove and how you want us to remove that. You will then authorize that and we'll do it for you, and then over time that will become a function that you can do yourself. There are various different ways that we can remove or anonymize data, which will be part of that document once we get to the point where we've defined everything. But effectively, you can either just blank data out, so there's nothing there anymore, just remove the email addresses, or, for example, or you can we can anonymize that, so starring out, so that it's no longer traceable, but you can still see that there was an indication that this guest was the same as another one. One of the issues with removing data, there is no going back on that. So it's up to you to define how long you need that. If you've asked us to remove that data and when we've done it, then that's it. We will not be able to get it back for you. You can define your own policies around that. If you want to just remove an individual from the, and we've actually had a couple of requests from people who have had guests ask them to remove their data from the database, then you don't necessarily need to communicate with us directly to do that. You can go to this database and then edit page again, find that person, and then bear in mind that they may have multiple records in here, and just blank out the data. You will need to put in this form something in the last name field, but you can either anonymize their name or you can remove it, but telephone number, address, etc. you can remove. In an individual booking for that guest, then you would need to remove the correspondence history. So emails that have been sent from that booking will, in the subject or whatever, will have the guest's contact details. So those are really the only two things that you need to do to remove an individual guest, if any of you have this from people wanting to remove their data from your database. So if you want us to purge data, remove data, anonymize data, then drop us a line to or submit a ticket, send an email to support or submit a ticket from your account, and we will queue that up to be done. It will be a few weeks before we can get there because there's a massively complicated thing. We're going to be removing stuff from log files and all sorts of places. If you've just got one guest to remove, then it's fine to do it this way. Yes, there are more places that you can remove it from, but when we start this data purging thing, then we will pick that up and get rid of those people. So you can just remove them manually if it's just one or two. I'm just reading some more of these questions. So there's the wording of the subscription option. You can completely change that to anything you like. If you don't send out newsletters, just remove it or change it to something that you do. Okay, third-party bookings or indeed interaction with third parties. I mentioned earlier on that we were having, our lawyer was still working on privacy policies and stuff, and we also have a new client contract which will be hopefully going out next week, maximum the week after that. The sense of our contract is not changing at all. It's just some specific wording relating to GDPR, but really, in fact, we're removing a couple of things from that relating to data and how it's treated, just securing it a bit more. That contract then also determines the relationship with us as a data processor and the relationship with other data processors. So essentially you are the data controller. You would have contracts in place with other data processors like Booking.com or maybe your payment processor, and we're all in the middle of that equation, but it's you are the data controller. So the fact that we share data with Booking.com, for example, is within your authorization. If someone books through a channel, Booking.com or Airbnb or something like that, then those channels are also data controllers in this equation. So there are two data controllers. You're a data controller because you need to process the booking. They're a data controller because they've taken the booking. They're also processing the booking, but they may also be sending them marketing materials. Almost certainly will be sending them marketing materials. So that the guest is submitting their data to Booking.com in this example. It's passing that data to you in order to facilitate the booking, but you've got two data controllers in the middle. We're in the middle as a data processor, just facilitating that. So if the guest subscribes to receive marketing materials from Booking.com, that's fine. They've opted in to do that. Just reading a couple more questions. There's a couple here which we're going to have to get a bit of clarification on, which we absolutely will do. So there's a question here about, it's basically saying for the tax man, I need to record guest details, or the maybe other regulations that you need in order to record guest details. You don't need consent in order to process the booking. The consent piece is in order to send marketing materials. So to facilitate the transaction, you're going to need the guest details or to comply with some kind of other regulation, like providing, keeping a history of invoices or transactions for your for tax records. All of that is straightforward. The real key is about getting subscriptions for your guests. Reading another couple of questions here. There's a question here, is it better to have the double opt-in box? If you do some reading online about that, you'll find advice on both sides. If someone has double opted in, then it's a very secure opt-in. Not only have they ticked a box, but they've also clicked a link in an email, and they've also therefore confirmed that they have that email address is accessible to them. I don't know if it's specifically necessary, because you will read some information that says it is. I don't think it is, but if you read around on that. So I don't think it's necessary, but for example, the Friendly Cottages opt-in is a double opt-in, and they took specific advice on that. Really, GDPR is about getting better quality data. And so someone that's clicked double opt-in really wants to receive information from you. And so maybe a better way to approach that is to say, right, if I want something that I really just want the people that actually want this, then a double opt-in is going to help ensure that. So there's a option here about we send monthly newsletters, but if they haven't ticked consent in the past, then how do we separate them out? And you would do that through this database filter. So if you had a consent, previous to GDPR changes, that will now be here as an option. And so you can filter out the people who had opted into that previously and then export that to a MailChimp list or whatever. So there's a question about remove data for a particular property. Obviously, property data itself is not personal data, but maybe for agency accounts, owner data obviously is. And so the answer to that is yes, we will be, as part of this data purging function that we're building, there'll be options in there to remove not just past guest data, but anonymize owner data, because we store personal data relating to owners and housekeepers and your own users as well. So there's lots of different places where we need to check for old data. Just reading a final few of these questions. There was a question here of how we will access the recording of this webinar. It will be a link to it in the Help Center. I think actually you also will get an email at the end of this, which will have a link to that to the webinar recording, but it will definitely be in the help center as soon as we've had time to process it and upload it there. So if you look in the next day or so, you should see it there. There's an option, where's the best place to place the privacy policy? I think it's accepted that that would be down in the footer of your own website. So create a page, put it in the footer. That's where you find it for most websites, as well as things like terms and conditions. Okay, just reading about a longer question here. Okay, so interesting question here. For those of you who've been with us for a very long time, and it was actually changed in, I think, September last year, autumn last year, there used to be an option, because it used to be possible to have a pre-ticked subscribe box. So you may have people who have subscribed in the past, but the box was pre-ticked, so they didn't physically tick that. It was effectively an opt-out, not an opt-in. That was allowed back in the day, but it isn't now. If you had that and you have a lot of people that subscribed in it, this is where potentially you are going to need to ask people to resubscribe. And this is different to the soft opt-in, which is where someone has purchased from you in the past may be willing to hear about similar goods and services again. Now, that is not something to be overused, and someone that booked with you 10 years ago is not necessarily going to be interested in hearing from you, but regular repeat guests may well be. So you don't necessarily need to get specific opt-ins from them. You should, it would be better if you did, but you don't necessarily need to. Depending on how you're doing things, it's where really specialist advice would come into play. For example, how you describe that in your own terms or privacy policy. But yeah, it's difficult to distinguish between people who had the pre-ticked box 3 years ago and people who in the last 3 months have actually physically ticked to opt in. But I would also argue someone that booked 3 years ago and hasn't interacted with you since is a less valuable contact in your database anyway. So really one of the keys to GDPR is understanding the difference between your data being an asset and a liability. Old data from people who are probably not going to interact with you again, or certainly not reliably going to interact with you again, is actually more of a liability. It's just potential for it to be stolen, hacked, compromised, whatever. Whereas current data is valuable to you. So that old data, it's up to everyone to define their data retention policy, but I'm not entirely sure of the value of data. Certainly in SuperControl here, we're going through, or have been going through all our marketing databases and things, and have removed pretty much everything because the value of it was not significant to us. So just there was a clarification on property data removal, and that is so if people have booked for a particular property and you no longer have that property and you want to remove guests that, or remove the data of guests who booked with that property specifically, then yeah, so I think we should be able to build that into the data purging tool. It might not be in the first version of it because that is really aimed by date, but effectively once we've built that data purging thing, then it could be used for multiple purposes. So that could come as a second wave there. So that's all the questions, unless anyone else has got some more to put into the thing. That's my hour up. So just to summarize really, the new functions are in database admin subscription options. Make sure you check that because you're going to have stuff there. You will, which you may not necessarily be current to your business. It's legacy from when you set up your SuperControl account. So make sure you check that. Especially, I would urge you to put a link to your own privacy policy. We will be sending around new contracts for everyone over the next couple of weeks. Nothing massively changing there, but some wording and actually securing it down a little bit. Is some ongoing development, so you will continue to see some changes in here. We mentioned the things about the terms and conditions, tick box for telephone bookings. Hopefully that will come in the not too distant future, as well as some other GDPR specific things. But really our responsibility as a data processor goes much beyond tick boxes, and it's about securing data and the policies and procedures and practices that go around that. And that's really an ongoing program for us and has been for a while, but trying to secure our system, build a better secure system. So we are going to be continually working on making things more secure. And from time to time, you will see security measures applied in your account, and we may also offer similar trainings or information specifically about security. A couple of questions came in around that, basically saying, if I want to remove all people who have subscribed in the past, yes, you can. But you can also just go to admin subscription options and disable the opt-in that was there and create a new one. So then people that subscribed in the past, it's still there, but you don't need to use them in when you're filtering stuff when you're doing database filters and sending to MailChimp or whatever. One person mentioned that subscription options isn't appearing in their admin menu. That is, this menu at the top is sort of cached, it's saved in the browser. If you just try logging out fully, so from your SuperControl account, and then log back in, it should appear for you. If it doesn't, try a hard refresh, which is Control and F5 on your keyboard if you're on a PC, to really force the browser to get a new version. And that it should be there. If you're still having problems, then let us know. So there were some questions that I didn't answer in that list, which we will do, just because they were a bit complicated or I needed to dig a bit deeper than can do during this call. So if you've, the team and I will answer those, and if necessary or if it is relevant, we will put some of those answers onto our GDPR Help Center page. If you've got any other questions, then just get in touch with our support team. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. As well, if you had problems using this webinar software, we'd be interested to hear, because as I said at the beginning, it's the first time we've used it, and we had well over 100 people joining today. So it would be very interesting to know how that went for you all. So thank you very much, and we will hopefully talk to you again in our next webinar soon.